Good evening, everyone, or hello, and thanks for tuning into this parent information evening, or recording of. This is the parent information welcoming Year 10 parents and students to their GCSEs. My name is Mr. Ballantyne. I'm the assistant head with responsibility for Key Stage 4. Joining me this evening is Mr. Jubb, head of learning for Year 10. And the aims of this evening are as follows. We're going to explain to you how GCSEs are structured, how the courses will be assessed, explain what the students are expected to achieve, also how we're going to, as a school, support your son or daughter through this exciting and challenging journey, and suggest ways in which parents can also support students to reach their potential. Let's start with what Year 10 is all about and why it's important. It will lay a strong foundation for GCSEs. The journey has started for knowledge and skills that will be examined and assessed in Year 11. It's not enough to wait for Year 11. Those good habits need to start now. All students should end Year 10 confident in how to succeed when they come into Year 11. We want to take Year 10 to build resilience in your son or daughter. This isn't going to be easy. Students will need to get used to picking themselves up. GCSEs are tough. They are tough. And also they need to take responsibility for their learning. We're expecting focus, 6 lessons a day, as well as homework. More of that later. But next slide, I'm going to introduce Mr. Jubb, who'll talk a bit about the Year 10 team.
Hi there. Good evening. Welcome from myself. Just on the screen there, we've got the Year 10 team. The students will be well supported throughout their GCSEs, both year 10 and 11, but obviously the focus for tonight is the Year 10. As you look through there, you'll hopefully notice the names of the tutors. They've been pretty stable for Years 7, 8 and 9, which is really good, as they will know your sons and daughters really quite well, obviously, by this stage. And your tutors still remain as the first point of contact, as they're still in daily contact every morning with the students. Also in place, you've got myself and Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Ballantyne in charge of overall Key Stage 4, and we're available as and when required for support as well. In addition, obviously, there's still the learning support team as and when that is required as well. Could I have the next slide, please, sir? So these are sort of your dates for your diary, I guess. Learner review days coming up in December. Make the appointments as you have done previously. Your parents' evening, the mock exams, and then just looking at the work experience. We're hoping that will be the 4th of July, but that is to be confirmed of the format and the date. But just a rough idea for you at this stage. And then obviously looks at the Year 11, so the next academic year, with those post-16 options, mock exams, and obviously the final exams in May, June time. Next slide, please, sir. So getting the basics right, pretty much, as Mr. Ballantyne referred to earlier, these good habits have been developed in Years 7, 8 and 9. So making sure that the students are in school on time every day, working hard. These are all a continuation of our expectations. There's nothing really new there. It's just making sure that they are still in that positive frame of mind and being in our lessons, working hard. To do well, pretty much we need to do all of those things on there. Make sure that we've got high quality of work, managing and organising workload, making sure that we've got the correct equipment, particularly if you're following a subject like art or your PEs, but obviously for every subject we need to make sure that students are bringing what they need to be, and then being punctual to lessons, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we go through a few more of the slides. Okay, so next slide, please. So the importance of attendance. We can't really stress this enough. We need the students in so that they can learn. And we're looking for a 97% as a minimum, being on time to school, to lessons, yeah, we'll come on to sort of a bit more to do with COVID later, and Mr. Ballantyne will mention that. But obviously that 97%, should there be any complications with COVID, then obviously there'll be some SOS work. But like I say, Mr. Ballantyne will cover that in more detail later on. But yeah, just need the students in and punctual really. Next slide, please, sir. So Sam's story, a low attendance. So 90% attendance sounds reasonably good. However, actually, when we start to break that into what that looks like per week, that would be a half day every week. And actually over a school year, that would mean that 4 whole weeks of lessons would be missed. And that's a big chunk of education that would be missed. And that is obviously going to have an impact on attainment, but also understanding and knowledge of the subjects that have been missed. Next slide, please, sir. So poor attendance, chances of success in GCSEs are massively affected by poor attendance. If your son or daughter is absent, once they're well enough and what have you, we would expect them to be contacting teachers to find out what work has been missed, catching up with the work, and obviously checking class charts to try and complete any homeworks that might have been missed as well. So a bit more onus on the students to follow that side of things up. But actually, if we miss 17 days from school, this equates to a whole GCSE grade, and that is a 91% attendance rate. So yes, we want you to be in as much as possible. Obviously, we understand that you might be ill. So it's just making sure that we catch that up should we require to do that. Then moving on to a very nice graph, thank you, sir. We have got the Sarah Bonnell study, which was it was carried out in a school in Stratford of East London, carried out in 2015-16, and it kind of backs up the previous slide. It's sort of saying if we can get our attendance high, our attainment is going to be high. If our attendance is lower, and as we get down towards that red group of sort of 90% or less pretty much, that's where we're then going to start to have our particular issues, but obviously it's a bit of a scale between the two. Next slide, please, sir. But punctuality also matters. I'm not going to read through all those numbers, but obviously you can see just being 3 minutes late to each lesson overall is going to equate to 125 lessons being missed over the 2 years, which equates again to a 94% attendance rate. So we can't stress enough how important it is to be in school and to be punctual. I'm going to pass you back to Mr. Ballantyne. He's going to have a bit more information on COVID.
Before we do that, it's probably worth just stressing that these are messages that we are saying to the students, and this is being delivered through Tutor as well. And we've been quite tight, aren't we, on punctuality this year and picking students up for it. So your support as parents in sort of getting home this message is much appreciated as we move on.
Thank you, Mr. Ballantyne.
I want to talk a little bit about COVID. We don't really live in a post-COVID world, although it sort of feels like it, I guess, sometimes. COVID is still very much at the front and centre of our mind in school, and we know there are students that have been off at the back end of last year and off at this year as well. But there have been changes in the way that we've been told as a school to go forward this term. We continue with our ventilation in the classrooms, windows open, doors open. We're still waiting for the government to give us those promised CO2 checkers, but that will be part of our regime. Also, when I talk about sanitation, so students are hand sanitised at the start of the lesson and desks are washed down at the end with spray and a squirt. It's really important that students continue their twice weekly testing at home, and we will continue as long as we're being given them by the government. Give them the LFT tests in the package through Tutor. Just getting into a habit of that. Wednesday and Sunday seem like good days to do it. If a student is displaying symptoms, or someone else in their family has tested, or actually, sorry, not tested, but if a student is displaying symptoms, I should say, they should get a PCR test and then inform the school if it is positive. If it's not positive, obviously they can come straight back into school. The question is really what if a family member is positive and the student isn't positive. So this has happened in school, and the advice has changed here, and that the students should continue to come into school, and we would advise them to test themselves using the LFTs, just to make sure. And if obviously if they're positive, that changes the situation, and the student would have to isolate for 10 days. We have what's called SOS folders on classwork. Class charts, sorry, students out of school. So this is work that is set for students who have to isolate, and they'll be put into these special groups, and work is set there by the classroom teacher. We're unable to offer live lessons and remote learning during this phase of the term and the year, just because the small numbers that are out doesn't make it conducive to teaching live lessons and having a classroom of students. So we're hoping that the isolation will be short, and that the SOS work that's in class charts will help. There isn't track and trace as there was last time round, whereby if a student is positive, we then contact anyone that they've been sitting with. But we will be doing something called warn and inform if students, a positive student, we know that they've been mixing closely with others. So again, we're just following the government guidance on this, and we urge you as well to follow any other NHS advice on COVID. Okay. So what are GCSEs? What makes up GCSEs? Well, it stands for, and I always say this because actually, I don't know how many people actually know this, General Certificate in Secondary Education. I don't think many students know that. When I ask them, they tend not to know what it is. They were reformed from 2015 by that there's a government initiative to make them more challenging. So the vast majority of them are all exam based, exams at the end. And your son or daughter will be sitting them in 2023. Scary stuff, isn't it? As I say, it's mainly by exam, and the non-exam content tends to be a lot less than it used to be maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So arts, DT, drama, music, PE, Mr. Jubb? Yeah, they still have elements of assessment in them, of coursework. NEA is what they're called, non-examined assessment. So if you hear your son or daughter talking about NEA, that's what coursework is. Everyone sits the same GCSEs, apart from in maths and science and modern foreign languages. There are 2 tiers of GCSEs here, foundation and higher. Foundation means there's a maximum grade that you can get of a 5, and a higher paper means that you cover a wider range of content, and that you can get up to a grade 9 in that. Typically, I was speaking to our head of maths about this today, the decision will be made in year 11 as to whether your son or daughter will be entered into the higher or the foundation paper. And actually in a subject like maths, that can be quite fluid throughout their time at GCSE. Maths teachers really know, and science and MFL, really know best about which tier to enter your son or daughter to, but you should get a sense of that from the targets that they will have for their subjects as to whether they're likely to be in, if they're a foundation or higher. Rule of thumb is if they're a secure 5 with a chance of getting a 6, it's more than likely they'll be in a higher. But if they're round about the 4 level or the lower end of a 5 in terms of how they're performing in year 11, it's likely that they'll be put in for a foundation. Whatever the decision is made in order to get the best result for your son or daughter. So mentioned the grading, it's not letter anymore, even though it is at A level. It's 9 to 1 in GCSE, 9 being the top A star, and a 4 being a standard pass. And 4s are what colleges and sixth forms tend to look for progressing to post 16. A strong pass would be the sort of top end of a C. In fact, I've got a slide to show you that there, which sort of converts it against the old way of grading. And you can see that a 4/5 is a pass, excuse me, with a 4 being a lower end of a low pass and a 5 being a strong pass. Colleges will look for 4s, 5 grade 4s, and English and maths. And what's important, actually, what's different is that English and maths are so important. The current way that it works is that if students don't achieve a grade 4 at English and maths, at school, they will need to sit it. It's a legal requirement for them to retake it and resit it at college or at sixth form. So more impetus to pass it in school. How did we do as a school over the last few years? Yeah, don't worry, we know what we're doing. Our grades have been increasingly good, and that graph shows that there. I mean, the last set of exams we had was back in 2019 when students actually sat exams, but they were the best results that we'd ever had. So we tend to measure as a school on whether students have achieved 9 to 4s in English, maths and science, or the English baccalaureate. And the baccalaureate, all of our students are entered for that, or the vast majority. It's a government term, and it's basically a sort of a qualification that says that you've got English, maths, 2 sciences, 1 language and 1 humanity. So it's a package of subjects. And the vast majority of our students, I'd say what, 98% are entered into the English baccalaureate. Here's a bit more detail about the results that we had this year. 71% achieving 5 in English and maths. That was this year with the teacher assessed grades, the assessments that they did. That was a 66% in 2019 when they did actual exams. And you can see the grades on there, 38%, 97 this year versus 30% in 2019. The reason perhaps that those figures are slightly different is that, as you may have seen in the news, nationally, grades have been strong this summer across the board. The reason I put the 2019 figures in there, not to make them look bad against our current grades, because actually they were the best exam results we've ever had. And if you look at our results, we are one of the top 10 non-selective schools in Berkshire. That's not West Berkshire, that's the whole of Berkshire if you take out of the grammar schools from Slough. So that's across Berkshire. You know, our results are really, really strong. So the teachers know what they're doing. You are in safe hands. A word on target grades. So students will be seeing their target grades, well, they should probably already have them in most subjects. We ask students to write them down on the front of each exercise book so they know what they're aiming for. The way these are worked out, they are based on Key Stage 2 attainment. So they look at the SAT scores, and a prediction is made. This is a national thing, and if you want to look it up, it's called the FFT, the Fisher Family Trust, which is an organisation that generates an algorithm that makes that prediction, which sounds a little bit robotic and mechanical, and but it does provide a national comparison of progress. But targets are there. They're targets, not limits. That's what we would say to the students. It doesn't define what they are or what they're aiming for. You've had flight paths in Key Stage 3 up to this point, and those flight paths are wider than 1 grade. Those will be narrowed down based on this algorithm that we use. So if you're on a 6 to 7 flight path, you'll either have a 6 or a 7 as your target grade. Okay, I'm going to hand back to Mr. Jubb now. We'll talk a little bit about homework.
So as you would probably expect, there will be more homework in Key Stage 4 than the students may have got in Key Stage 3. As a rough approximation, we're sort of expecting about an hour a week per subject. If this homework's completed as it's set, that's probably the ideal. We appreciate it's not always possible, but if that is the situation, it will make things a lot more manageable for them. And it's kind of just trying to make sure that that becomes a routine that helps them with their time management and what have you. We'd recommend that if you haven't done so already, to download the app for class charts, and obviously you'll need a parent code for that if that's the case, and a phone call into school maybe would be helpful on that front, or an email into us, and then we'll sort that for you. But yeah, just trying to get it so that it's manageable, and we get some sort of routine, I think is where we need to be in terms of homework. Next slide, please, sir. However, If it becomes excessive, unmanageable, first sort of point of contact would be possibly the tutor if it's across a number of subjects. If it's just a particular subject, then a conversation or an email with that particular subject teacher probably more appropriate. To help in terms of making sure that homework doesn't become excessive, we've got homework club that will be in place. That will be on every week. And it's in place for any students really, but I guess particularly those that might struggle to do homework at home. But like I say, open to all really. In terms of completing homework, it's a really good idea if you can sort of find a space where your son or daughter can complete their homework, and yeah, just somewhere that's quiet, but actually is an area that is sort of dedicated to them. That might be a desk in their room, it might be a desk in a study, whatever fits really. But just trying to find that nice quiet space for them would be ideal. In terms of revision, there'll be revision guides, and obviously get your son or daughter to speak to the teachers of the subjects, and that'll be through Scope A. Should you wish to buy them through school, you don't have to, I don't think, Mr. Ballantyne, but I think that is definitely an option that is there. And the key to revision really is little and often. So making sure that there is a little bit of time where there's a bit of consolidation work done from the notes that are taken in lessons. But the more regular it happens, the more likely it is to be embedded really. Next slide, please, sir. Some of these websites and apps are particularly useful in that revision process. So you've got Caboodle, you've got BBC Bitesize, you've got Hegarty Maths, as well as some of those Pixel apps. Now, a number of those come up on the students' sort of homepage, if you like, if they log into their school website. Accounts and what have you, so are readily available, and obviously we'd recommend that they're used as a revision tool, not the be-all and end-all, but definitely something that would be useful as the students go along. Thank you, sir. Next slide. So how can you guys help your son or daughter as we go through? So both Mr. Ballantyne and myself have got sons and daughters and what have you that have gone through year 11, are going through year 11, and it can be tricky at times to know what is best to say, what is best to do. So we just sort of thought, actually, if we can put a few bits and pieces on here that might help. So there's obviously a good starting point is to have a conversation about the achievements, about the challenges as you go through. Trying to give encouragement and praise as that happens, and offer a bit of reassurance alongside that. So where appropriate, like we said earlier, just have that area that is set aside for them, and that will help them, as well as obviously putting the regular conversations about how the subjects are going and that side of things. We kind of touched on this a bit earlier, but helping them to gain a routine is particularly useful. So it might be that they'll come home from school and actually might need 30 minutes, an hour just to reset, and then maybe do a bit of work, have dinner. But then equally important is to have that balance. So making sure that within the routine there is some space for, well, actually I want to go and meet up with friends, I want to go and go to my singing lessons, whatever it might be, but making sure that there is a bit of a routine in place so that we know when homework is going to get done really. And then obviously equally as important, food and sleep. Again, with that routine, particularly for sleep, really important that as teenagers they're getting enough sleep to ensure that they're fully focused when they're in school and what have you. And yeah, obviously food as you go along, always important for all of us really, but particularly as a teenager growing, as well as the energy required as you go through. Yeah. So Last sort of 2 or 3 bits, you've got obviously make sure that you continue to communicate with teachers, heads of department, tutor, myself, should that be required. Should things be not going quite as well, or actually if things are going really well, we're quite happy to hear that as well. And try not to stress too much. It's there. They've got to find their way through, and the role of the parent is just to support them through that, as I'm sure you have been through Key Stage 3, and it's just trying to ensure that they're becoming independent learners as best as possible, and to help them to do that with the routines and that side of things, really. So yeah, that's how you guys can help. I'm going to pass you back to Mr. Ballantyne for the last slide.
Yeah, so thanks, Mr. Jubb. I've got just a couple of quotes here that I think sort of sum up what we've been saying. Sometimes what we say to students is that it's more when you finish GCSEs and when you go out into the wider world, whether it's college, sixth form or work, you're showing not just those grades that are on the piece of paper, but you're showing that you've been through this journey, and you're showing that you've got that resilience. You're showing that, yes, you didn't quite get it right on several times, but you know what? Doesn't matter what the grade was, you pick yourself back up and went on with it. So just going back to what Mr. Jubb was saying about stress, I think students will be anxious. They will be worried about GCSEs, and I think we all have to play our part in keeping a lid on those worries, that it's okay to fail, it's okay to get stuff wrong, it's what they do the next day to make it right that it's important. So that's what that top quote was about. And the bottom one is, and I'm guilty of this as a parent in the past: why aren't you working? And this comes down to the habits and routines. And they say, well, I finished my work for today. Yeah, but Mr. Jubb told us you had an hour per subject per week. It's getting into those sorts of conversations with your kids that well, I found that aren't really that useful. So it's about, get them into those routines. When they're working, they're doing the work for that hour and a half. But when they're not working, when they're on their Xbox, or whatever it might be that they're doing, they're not working. So not expecting them to be coming home from school and working all night long. They do need to be teenagers and do what they need to do. I hope that's been useful for you all, for all of you, I should say. We would be happy to take questions if you want to email those in via the office, or to Mr. Jubb, or to myself directly. Like I say, we're here over the next 2 years to make sure that your son and daughter really succeed in their GCSEs, and we look forward to supporting them on that journey. Thanks for watching.